Welcome, Virnitia. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you here and learn more about your journey and your story. You have such an interesting background in where you have been in the insurance space, really in strategy, all of these things. And then 2 or 3 years ago, you transitioned and moved over into a chief diversity officer role, which is a significant jump and very different. But talk to us a little bit about what has your journey been over the course of your career, and what were some highlights and lowlights, and what brings you here where you are now?
Thank you so much, Monica. This is quite an honor. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I never turned down the opportunity to share. I mentioned to you prior that someone did that for me. And so that's why I'm able to give it back, if you will. My journey started back in Augusta, Georgia, where I grew up on a military base. And growing up on a military base, you grow up with everyone. And the one thing that we had in common was that we were all in the military. But it was at that point that I really realized that, people are people. And so I had that great opportunity to see many different backgrounds, many different ethnicities, families. And that taught me that this world is full of great humans that you can connect with. And so that always stayed with me throughout my career, throughout my journey. As you mentioned, my background in insurance, I worked for 23 years at Travelers Property Casualty, and I ended as a VP of operations. But during that journey, I had many different roles, many different parts of the organization, and I was considered a horizontal person. I didn't fit into any one vertical. Wherever there was a team that needed a leader that was really looking to extract potential, that's where I would go. So it didn't matter the subject matter expert. It just mattered that I could go and help build a high-performing team. So for me, the more dysfunctional the team was thought of, the better that was, because that was the challenge for me. Along my career at Travelers, I had a great mentor who said, you've done all these many different things, but what is the common thread? And for me, that was organizational leadership and culture and people. And so my passion has always really been about people and potential and culture. And so going back to Augusta, Georgia, and the military base, really seeing the power when people come together, what they can accomplish. So it was that time that I decided to go back and get my doctorate in organizational leadership and really study it, human behavior and what people do to come together to achieve goals. That led me to really stepping out of Travelers. I worked for New York Life for a brief time, but started my own consulting firm, doing executive coaching, counseling. And I had several clients who were CEOs or leaders of Fortune 500, 100 companies. And they would always say, culture's great. All this is great, but what about this DEI stuff, Virnitia? We've been spending millions of dollars for many years, and we're not really seeing the progress. What can we do differently? And it was that point at which I realized, because I had the business background, I understood what they meant. And I was able to really take a look at what was happening at DEI at the time, all the traditional approaches, what was going on in the space. And I said to myself, we need to revolutionize DEI, right? We've been on this race for a long time. To their point, are we really making the progress that we could? And so that's when I went back to study that and really understand the history of DEI, what was happening at that time. And I was asked to consult with Santander Consumer at the time on their new DEI council. And I said, this is great. You have a council. There are many things that can be accomplished. But if you really want to do this, you need to have a chief diversity officer, and you need to invest in it. And you need to make sure that there is a long-term sustainable approach to DEI. And so the leader at the time, Virnitia, he said, great, that's you. You are our CEO. And CDO, excuse me, Chief Diversity Officer. I said, no, I have my own business. I'm retired. I'm good. But this is such an amazing organization. And it was the right time. This was 2020, coming off the heels of George Floyd's murder. And so there was a lot of energy, a lot of input. into what we could do at Santander. And so I said yes, and at that time became Chief Diversity Officer, and later for all of the US.
That's a phenomenal story. And I loved how it was one of those things where, you changed lanes a couple of times. And like you said, in your mind, you considered yourself retired and you were kind of doing more consultancy type work. Talk a little bit about this idea of, this courageous decision to take this risk and say yes, right? Because a lot of people would not have said yes. They might have said, not me, not now. Or like you, who've had this amazing, accomplished career in another area, and then being able to say yes in a space, like you said, that maybe you didn't have as much experience. Most people, research shows, most women would have said, I don't check all 10 boxes, so I'm going to say no until I go back and get the experience and can come back. But you said yes. So talk to us a little bit about that. Like, what are your how do you weigh that risk reward kind of thing in your head and say yes?
That's right. I think that's a really good point, and something that a lot of people suffer from. And for me, it goes back to my father's words of being all I could be and trying things. You don't know unless you try it. And so I was always, the type of person to say, bring it on, I'm going to learn. As I mentioned, my experience at Travelers and not being a subject matter expert in all those things, being a horizontal person, but knowing that I could come in and learn, and with people together, we could accomplish some great things. And so for me, it's aligning passion and purpose. Those two things coming together. I knew I was passionate about this work, right? I knew that there was a purpose for me at that time. And if not me, then who? Right. So those are the things that really encouraged me. But you are absolutely right. Huge risk. But I went to work really identifying individuals. I have an amazing team of people who came together to really accomplish the great things that we've done in DEI at Santander. So I think passion, purpose, people, bringing all those three things together and not being afraid to take that risk. Having the confidence to say, I don't have all of those things, but I do have these things. And I'm going to bring to the table the things that I have. I'm willing to learn, make mistakes, grow for all the things that I don't.
I love what you said about learning. I mean, to me, when we're coaching our cohorts of women and working with lots of other organizations, I love to say that the new superpower is learning, especially in this digital age, the digital disruption. Nobody's ever going to master everything because it's constantly changing. So let's talk a little bit about, the concept of learning, because the other important thing you said is learning and failing. And I think that is the other thing that most people are so averse to failing. Can you talk a little bit about, how, in what areas, maybe even too, where you were learning and failing? Because you went from insurance and then Santander, like a financial services, institution, also changing lanes in terms of your DEI, gaining that DEI expertise and flexing that muscle. Talk a little bit about the learning gaps for you. What did you identify and how did you identify them and how did you close them quickly?
Yes, absolutely. At Santander, our philosophy really is around starting with inclusion and human connection at the core of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so, yes, we measure. Yes, we have the data. But that's really not where we focus. We really focus on human connection and building bridges between people. That is the core of it with inclusion. But what I had to learn was the organization may not be ready for that. People may not be ready for that, right? So being able to go and meet people where they are, because I will come out the gate and say, hey, it's all about human connection. And it's so clear for me, the path that we need to go down. But the lesson is making sure that you're bringing people along with you, making sure that you're speaking a language that people can understand and that it resonates with them, and then helping to shepherd them on the journey. So in the early days of my work, I'm ready to go. It's all about inclusion. It's all about human connection. And people are like, yeah, but how many Latinos do we have?
Right.
Yeah, I know, but really, this is the way that we need to move forward. And so learning that has
Mm,
created great success when we were able to say, let's talk about how many Latinos we have within the organization. And let's talk about why they're here and why they stay and the culture that we've created
mm,
that welcomes not only Latinos, but everyone in the
right.
spirit of inclusion.
Hmm.
So that's an example. And I think it's really about having the courage to make mistakes,
Hmm.
having the courage to understand that that literally is the only way in which you're going to grow and thrive and truly succeed,
Hmm.
is making those mistakes. Thinking back when you were a kid, right? We were making mistakes all the time. We'd fall off the bike and get back up and keep
Yes.
going, right? And so that's what it's about. And I just encourage people to take those risks, be courageous, excuse me, and then know that when you make those mistakes, you're actually growing. It's actually making you stronger. And that's going to help you in the end.
I love that. And it's so true in terms of the growth is in actually those mistakes and those teachable moments of like, okay, what did I do wrong? How do I do it differently? And then you're able to kind of like get the momentum and keep going. I love that. I want to shift gears a little bit because you've said a little where you mentioned how, learning, but learning together. And you've talked about also the power of community and culture, and that yes, there are the Latinos, your Black professionals, your LGBTQ, plus professionals, but it's the community as a whole, because I, like you, remember kind of trying to help bring them along and saying like, yes, it is important to have your segregated groups and the safe space for your groups, but then you're preaching to the choir. How do you really then connect and create that awareness? So let's talk about the power of community
Yeah.
and, how you go about building strategic and powerful relationships to move ahead.
Yes, it's so important because you are also leaving others behind when you do that. When we're only
Mhm.
focused on certain groups, it really becomes a conversation about what about everyone else?
Mhm.
And diversity, equity, and inclusion is for everyone. It literally is about everyone. And so
Mhm.
that personal connection that people have to have and feel to this body of work is so important. Creating a community.
Mhm.
At Santander, we have 7 business resource groups, and similar to as you've described, we went from employee resource groups to business resource groups to make sure that that business impact was there and the
Mhm.
value that these groups were bringing to the organization. The other thing that we're really proud about is that our 7 BRGs work together. So
Mm.
when we're doing something for Military Appreciation Month, we're
Right.
going to look across and find those members of the LGBTQ community who
Mhm.
are veterans, women who are veterans, right?
Mhm.
People of different ethnic groups who are in the military. And we come together to really make sure that everyone sees this community and not just one segment of our employee population.
Right.
I think that's really, really important because you have to demonstrate that. The
Mhm.
other thing that we do is really focus on cultural curiosity. And so
Mm.
for me to be authentic and vulnerable and share with you who I am and the
Mhm.
many components and parts of me opens the door for you to do the same. And
Mm.
that's how we create that community. It
Mhm.
starts with us both saying, you know what, we're both humans,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so let's talk about what we have in common first. And as we
Mhm.
know, studies have shown that humans have more in common actually than they do
Right.
differences. So
Absolutely.
let's tap into that first and then explore our differences and begin to appreciate our uniqueness and our differences. And then I realized I really need you to have a fulfilled, rich life. I need you
Mm.
because you are different than me. But it
Mm.
has to start with our common bonds, what we have in common, our goals, the things that we have in our backgrounds. And if we are open and vulnerable, we'll find them. They are
Mm.
there. Really quickly, there's one exercise if I'm doing workshops and such that I ask people to do, which is just talk to the person next to you and identify one thing that you didn't know about that person that you have in common. And when
Mm.
you do that, I got to tell you, Monique, it's like magic in the room.
Yes.
People do not realize how quickly you can find those commonalities. We always talk about 6 degrees of separation, but there's
Yes.
always something that
Mhm.
we can bond on. And once you start there, the rest of it sort of falls in place.
I'd love to talk to you a little bit about, and it's an extension of this. And I love that exercise that you do of finding something that you have in common with someone that you didn't know. We get this all the time in terms of, and even myself when I was much younger too, right? When you're the few, the only, in an organization, and then you were trying to get mentored or sponsored, and then you feel disheartened because you're like, there's nobody who looks like me, so I'm not going to be able to get anywhere. And to be quite honest, the sponsors who really opened doors for me look nothing like me.
Yes.
And if I would have waited around to wait for, the C-suite Latina leader, I might have been waiting around for a very long time, especially in the organizations I worked at. How do you help encourage, and maybe even you, like, in your community, what were some of those strategic relationships, mentoring, sponsorship, relationships that helped you move ahead? And how do you find common ground with those individuals?
Yes, it's knowing again who you are and what you bring to the table. Even in sponsorship, it's a two-way street. So making sure, again, if you find that connection and what you're giving, you will receive back. And that's the first thing. Again, courage to go seek out and find a sponsor. It takes that. Knowing that you really should be looking for someone who is different than you. You kind of got yourself. You know who you are. You've got your culture and your background and your way of thinking and your communication style. How do you learn and grow from someone who is not like you? And that's the most valuable thing that you can do. So we within our company have a model that we utilize in this space, and we call it the SAM model, which is around sponsorship, advocacy, and mentorship. And we know that all three of those things are critically important, and all three of those things are very different.
Yes.
So we democratized mentorship a couple of years ago, where we said mentorship should be for all. So within our organization, anyone who raises their hand to say, I want a mentor, we're going to make that happen for you. We look at mentorship as skill-based, and it's really important, particularly as you're a junior in your career. So we wanted to make sure it's not just for the chosen few or the top talent, but anyone who raised their hand should have access to a mentor. Then advocacy is different, which says I'm going to have someone who's going to advocate for me. This is more around career navigation, cultural navigation. I've got someone who's really going to advise me and speak on my behalf and advocate for me. And then there is sponsorship, which you hit on, which is literally, I'm going to go to bat for you. I'm going to use my political capital, and I'm going to put my name on the line right along with yours, and I'm going to sponsor you in your career. I care about you staying within the organization, growing and thriving. I've had the great fortune of having all three of those in my career. I've had great mentors, great advocates, and great sponsors. And it is important that you really identify people who are truth tellers, who are going to give you the honest truth about yourself, about the organization, about how to navigate, what spots are you missing that you really need to develop and grow, and where do you need to show up and show your strengths so that the organization recognizes what you bring to the table. This is really, I think, a phenomenal model, and we're really looking to make sure that we continue to expand all of our programs, sponsorship, advocacy, and mentorship, and talk about the differences between those things. We have a program with sponsorship that's called our Spark program, and this is for our diverse top talent in the organization, where we feel this is our next set of leaders across the organization. So how do we differentially, uniquely invest in that group, provide them with sponsors who don't look like them, who don't have the same background, who are not sitting in the same functional space that they are. And through that, I got to tell you, they get exposure across the broad organization, but they also learn about themselves. So we focus on leading themselves, leading the business, and leading others, and making sure that they really go deep to understand how they then too can become a sponsor for someone else. And that's what the program is really about, is growing that next set of leaders, that next set of sponsors for others across the organization.
That's phenomenal. And I really like how you are making people understand the difference between sponsor, advocate, and mentor, because they are very, very different. And, you know, mentors can grow into sponsors. But then the advocacy piece is important, but the sponsorship of, you know, spending some of that, you know, social capital that they have on you is important, but it also takes a different mindset to develop that relationship as well. So I think those are all super powerful. I want to dig a little deeper into the truth tellers, right? Because I think that's where people will say, yeah, I have a really great, you know, board of directors. I have the advocate, I have the mentor, I have the sponsor, but they all, you know, you may have that, but they may not be a truth teller. And truth tellers, sometimes we may just avoid them too, because it can be painful, right? It's this concept of true constructive feedback, where, you know, let's talk about feedback a little bit, and how do you gather feedback for yourself and making sure that it's true? Like, how do you make sure that how do you take the sting out of it, or can you, or how do you build a muscle to withstand the sting of that feedback and make sure that you're getting it to grow?
Absolutely. It is the mindset. It's understanding that you're constantly growing. We are organisms, right? So we are constantly growing. Our bodies are growing and changing, and so are our minds. And so understanding that you have to feed that, you have to nurture that, you have to be in a position where you can understand what is the next great opportunity for you to learn and grow. And I think when you have that mindset, you welcome it. You welcome feedback. I would say also understanding that feedback can come from anywhere. It's not just the leadership that needs to provide feedback. If you are leading people, it's very important to understand from the people who are on your team, constantly getting feedback from your peers, from your stakeholders all across the organization. For me, I think it's having an advocate, having someone in your corner. And people may not even know that you have this relationship with this person. But this person is in the room and they hear what people are saying about you when you're not there. Sometimes people will not say that to your face. They will not tell you that truth, right? Because it's hard. It's hard to give good, honest, constructive feedback. But if you have someone who can listen and ask the questions, well, what do you really think about Monica? What is that, right? And have that person be a truth teller to you, and be able to share what is your brand in the organization. Not what you think it is, but actually what it is. There's a book by Keith Weich, who is the former president of Cub Foods. It's called Good is Not Enough. I love this book. It's one of my favorites. And in that book, he talks about the PEP model. And this is all about career progression. And he talks about the fact that 25% is your performance, right? What you do every day, that's sort of table stakes, 25%. 25% is exposure or experiences that you get. And 50% is perception. What is the perception? What is your brand? What are people saying about you in the organization? How will you ever know that if you are not getting that feedback, that good, honest feedback? So I say, ask often, ask many, and then take it in. You're not going to address every piece of feedback that you get, right? It's actually a confidence killer. If you try to do that. Right? So it's not about that. It really is about taking it in, looking at the themes, understanding where you can evolve and grow. Really quick story. A piece of feedback that I got is that I can be intimidating to people. When they come into my office, I can be intimidating. And I thought about that, and they're like, well, you know, you're pretty tall. I'm 5'9". I'm not that tall, but I'm pretty tall. So you're 5'9", and I can hear my mother still on my shoulder. Sit up, right? Sit up. And you sort of, I sit like this, shoulders back, and I sit like this. And so I had to learn that when someone comes into my office and they're sitting across from me, just lean in. Just lean in. And a small little change like that can make a world of difference. So I could have said to myself, you are 5'9". you sit this way, there's nothing you can do, and
Mhm.
I'm just going to toss that feedback out the window. But
Right.
I really had to listen. And if I have a perception or someone's telling me that I can be intimidating,
Mhm.
what can I do and how do I incorporate that? Because that's not how I want to show up.
Mhm.
And that can affect me in my career. So a
Yes.
very nuanced thing of just leaning in really helps. And it is authentically Virnitia. I didn't
Mhm.
change myself or who I am by doing that, but it made a world of difference in the way in which others perceive me. So it is, when we say feedback is a gift, it really is. You just have to take it in and figure out how you're going to take that nugget of goodness that was shared with you and use it, right, to help you in your career. It's not easy, but it's definitely, definitely achievable.
That's such a tangible example, and I love that you shared that. Especially like you said, a subtle change can be a significant it can have significant impact. And so just that idea of figuring out to lean in is just enough. But what I loved is that you didn't end up going too drastic where you're making yourself smaller and then it's a detriment to you, right? So it's
Right.
just like, what is the fine line that you can make sure that you are getting there, but you don't cross that line, where it ends up being not really resourceful for yourself. I loved it.
That's right. And I will say again, we are multifaceted beings. I had someone on my team say, well, I don't know if I should talk this way. It doesn't feel like it's me. You are all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And your ability to tap into the many different parts of you
Mm-hmm.
is so powerful. Knowing that your authentic self has many different dimensions and
Mm-hmm.
parts, which part do you need to tap into right now
Yeah.
and bring that part forward? And I think that that's powerful. You mentioned before being the
Mm-hmm.
only person in a room, being the only woman, the only person of color, the only young person, whatever it might be in the room. I've often thought about that in terms of what a privilege. What a privilege. I am
Yes.
the only in this room. What am I going to do with this opportunity? What am
Mm.
I going to do? So again, it all comes down to mindset. We can sit back and say, man, I'm the only in this room. I feel small. I don't feel the same. I feel these things. Turn that around. Feel the power
Yes.
in that, that
Mm-hmm.
there are many people before you that paved the path so that you
Mm-hmm.
could be there. And there are many people coming behind you that need you to be there.
Yeah.
And this is your moment. Use your voice, see the opportunity, see the privilege in
Mm-hmm.
being the only in that room. Not easy. Again, nothing that I'm saying is just like, oh, just go be the only. No, it's
Yeah.
not that. But when you have that mindset and you bring that to the table, it is so powerful and you just feel different.
I couldn't agree with you more in the sense of shifting that mindset and realizing that really shifting that idea that your obstacle is your opportunity, right? You might see
Yes.
it as an obstacle of being the only in the room, but then that is your opportunity to make that change, that difference, because you are going to be hyper visible. So use that visibility to your
Yes.
advantage.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And it is a privilege. Just have that mindset that it is a privilege.
Mhm.
And you earned it. You were not there by mistake. You're
Yes.
not there by
Yes.
mistake.
I agree. I agree so much. I want to change gears a little bit because I think it's super important where you talked about finding the clarity on, your strength, your purpose, that perception, right? The perception of self, but also perception of others. So perception is reality, right?
Right.
Um, how would you help someone articulate or gain that clarity to where they can articulate to others what they want to be known for? Like, what is that strength or that purpose? Because that's a lot of it, right? If you don't define what you want to be known for, then others are going to do it for you. How did you gain that clarity on, you really doubling down and understanding that you may not have been a subject matter expert, but you were someone who knew how to pull talent and create high performing teams out of individuals. It didn't matter what industry, what division, whatever. How did you gain that clarity? And how did you start really articulating? And how would you tell a listener where they should start?
Yes. Introspection.
Mm,
Introspection. You have to do the work to learn yourself. Who
mm.
are you? And not the lies that you've been told, right? Not the things all along the way, but truly at your core. And so I had to do that work. I had to understand, who am I? What do I
Mhm,
believe in? What do I value? Who am I becoming? Because we're always becoming,
mhm.
right? We're not done till our
Yes.
last breath. So we are becoming. So who am I becoming? Who do I want to become? And it takes time. When you meet someone, and
Mhm.
you first meet them, and then you nurture the relationship, and then after a while you feel as though, oh, I know this person, I'm very comfortable. We
Right.
sort of skip that with ourselves because we're with ourselves all the
All the
time, and we
time.
feel like, oh,
Yes.
I know me, but if you have not done the introspection, done the work to really get to know yourself, then
Mhm.
you can't do the things that we're talking about, and you cannot skip that step. I
Mm.
recently came back from South America, and I was at a workshop there, and there was an anthropologist who talked about this very thing,
Mhm.
about each day, the time in contemplation with oneself
Mm.
really helps us connect with other people, to where we don't see people outside of ourselves as others,
Oh,
right?
wow. Yes. Uh-huh.
Because when we do that, that's
Mhm.
where all the discrimination and the
Yes.
stereotypes and the generalization, all these things come into play, because we see someone other than
Mhm.
ourselves. But when you really recognize yourself and tap into your own humanness,
Mhm.
then you're able to see the humanness in other people. And
Mm.
so that humanity is so important to us. When you can do that, you recognize who you are, then you're ready to present that to the world. You're ready to connect with other people. You're ready to accept that feedback and grow and thrive. So throughout my career, I have had phenomenal people, executive coaches and sponsors and mentors and advocates that I will always give the credit to,
Mhm.
because they were able to help me with that introspection, with the contemplation, to be more confident in who I am. And that's my advice. I would really, really encourage people to get to know themselves really at
Mm.
their core and who they are. Again, not what they've been told, what they
Right.
should be,
Uh-huh.
but who are you? And love yourself. And I think that that's where you have the opportunity to say, okay, I can do this. I can take this risk. And what's the worst that will happen? What's
Mm.
the worst that will happen?
That is so powerful. Introspection is the key. That is phenomenal. I could go on and on talking to you, Vernitia, but I know that we have to wrap this up. So I'm going to jump to our lightning round questions
Perfect.
that will, maybe give us a deeper glimpse of who you are and what you like to do. So I'm going to jump into what book has greatly influenced you?
Yeah, it's that Keith Weich book that I mentioned before,
Mm,
Good is
mhm,
Not Enough, literally changed the way that I view
mhm.
how I need to focus on my career,
Yes.
which is that brand and that perception is
Mhm,
so important. Doing a good job, doing it well, getting the results isn't enough. It's not
mhm,
enough. It really matters in terms of how you show up, the relationships that you have
mhm.
across the organization. So that really changed my perspective. And I recommend that book to anyone.
Love it. What is your favorite inspiring quote or saying?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So this comes from my father.
Uh-huh.
I believe it's a limerick. I'm not really sure, but it's good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better is best. And I have
Ah.
just lived that my entire life. Because again, it's not this strive for perfection. I had to learn that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does not
Mm-hmm.
mean perfection, because we know that's the killer of excellence.
Yes.
But it is this journey of learning and growing and not stopping. You mentioned earlier that growing, knowledge, learning, that's the new capital. That's the new
Yes.
asset. That's the differentiator today.
Mm-hmm.
And so that particular quote has always I try to live my life by that, to always keep learning and always keep growing.
I love it. I have to learn that. That is so good. I'm gonna have to go back and learn that verbatim.
Yes.
Um, What is one word or moniker you would use to describe yourself?
Ooh, I would say blessed and
Mm.
privileged
Hmm.
um, to serve, right?
Yes.
I am really, really fortunate to have lived the life that I have with all its bumps and bruises, right?
Yes.
To be in a position to be able to share and to give and to help others, particularly in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we can get so caught up in buzzwords and all this other
Hmm.
stuff,
Yes.
where it's really about human connection. So privileged and blessed and just so fortunate to be able to serve and to give back to others.
Ah, that's beautiful. What is one change, a habit, behavior, action that you implemented that made your life better?
Oh, I think it's going to come down to that thing about perfection,
Mm.
right? I think
Hmm.
it's two things. One is that, you're always learning and you're always growing. And I had to change that. I had to really understand that it's the journey,
Uh-huh.
right? That's most important, not
Yes.
the
Uh-huh.
destination. I'm a destination person. Let's get there.
Uh-huh.
But this is really more about the journey. So I had to change that. And then it's really for me about knowing myself,
Hmm.
knowing that you are enough and what you have to bring to the table is valuable,
Hmm.
and you will learn and grow the rest. So knowing, having that balance of confidence and humility at all times was something I had to learn. And
Right.
now sitting here at 52 years old, I can say I've achieved that and I can
Uh-huh.
give that to other people. But I had to learn, those were the things, finding my authentic voice.
Hmm.
And when I say my
Yes.
authentic voice, again, that's going back to introspection. Who am I? How do I want to communicate? How do I want to show up?
Hmm.
All of those things along my journey, I had to learn and I had to tweak and change to be who I am today.
Hmm.
Um, Working for this fantastic organization, leading people, culture, DEI, all of those things that are so critical to any organization's success. So I'm just
Hmm.
honored that I have that opportunity and made those changes and had great people along the way that helped me see them, that I needed to make those changes and guide me and support me as I was doing that.
Mm, amazing. Again, the power of introspection. Fantastic. And then the final one, which is one of my favorites. So here you are about to walk out on stage and address thousands of people. What is that power song that is going to just, really be that introduction to Virnitia as she walks out on stage?
That's an easy one for me. It's Unwritten by Natasha Bedingfield.
Mm. I love
That
it. Yes.
song, literally, again, it speaks to the power that my best days are ahead of me. I
Mm.
don't know, but I'm
Yes.
so excited that the rest of my life is unwritten and it's up to me to shape what I want that to be. That's so empowering. Every time I hear that song, I get re-energized and re-inspired because it is just so hopeful.
Mhm.
And so that's easy. It's Unwritten by Natasha Bedingfield.
Such an amazing choice. And it's going to round out our Beyond Barriers podcast playlist that we love to create. It's going to be such an amazing song to add. I love it. Thank you so
Fantastic.
much. Oh my gosh, this has been amazing. I could go on and on having a conversation with you, but thank you so much for giving us, gracing us with your time and your insights. And I really loved really the power of getting people to understand the introspection, the truth telling, and really, finding that voice and knowing what you want to be known for and how powerful that is. Thank
Yes.
you so much. And look forward to certainly staying in contact. And I have to ask this because every time I forget, the audience always comes back and says, hey, how do I get in touch with
Yes.
media? So what's the best way for someone to connect with you and just, follow you and engage?
Absolutely. LinkedIn is the best way. Again, I have this wonderful name that my mother gave me. Literally, I'm one of maybe two Vernitias in the United States of America. So you can find me. But LinkedIn, Virnitia Dixon, that's the best way to reach out and get in contact with me.
Amazing. Well, thanks again so much. And we look forward to staying in contact.
Awesome. Thank you.